Hi, my name is Richard Duffy, and many of you will already know me through my SAP Business One videos that you can find on my YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/DuffyRichard. But a couple of people have been in touch with me recently asking me to do an updated set of SAP Business One installation videos. So that's exactly what I'm going to do for you. So the latest version of SAP Business One is version 9.3, and the latest Service Pack release is Service Pack 5. So what I'm going to do though is I'm going to show you how to do an installation. We're going to install SAP Business One 9.3 Service Pack 3, and then in another video I'm going to show you how you can apply a Service Pack to your implementation. So I've already gone ahead and I've downloaded my SAP Business One installation files. What I've also got is I've got my SQL Server machine, and this SQL Server box, because I'm doing this very first installation showing you how to install the SQL Server version of SAP Business One, this SQL Server box is running SQL Server 2012. Alright, so the environment is fully patched up. It's got all the very latest service packs and Microsoft patches and everything like that that are required to run the system securely and effectively. And if I go in here and I'll just log in using my SA username and password, you'll see right now in my SQL Server, if I go and I look at my databases, right now this is a perfectly clean SQL environment. No SAP Business One components installed on here as yet. So there's a couple of ways that you can install SAP Business One. You can go and you can install each of the packages one by one by going into your installation source and going into the packages. But the easiest way to do it, in the root directory of your installation file, you will find a application here called Setup, funnily enough. So I like to right click on that and always choose Run as Administrator. That way you're going to make sure that the setup is running with elevated permissions, and you're not going to run into any permissions issues as you're going through and doing the installation, because the installer is going to be creating services, it's going to be installing files into the file system, it's going to be doing a whole bunch of different things. So the last thing you want to have is any security challenges. So now you've got your SAP Business One setup wizard, and it's not overly complex to do this, folks. So again, you basically select your language. So I'm going to choose English US, and then you say next. Now you've got two choices. You can test that your system environment is actually ready and it's got all the prerequisites required to install SAP Business One. But if you've done as I have and you've gone through and you've made sure you've got enough memory, enough disk space and so on and so forth, you shouldn't really need to do that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to run in and I'm going to perform the setup. And if you've ever run the setup before, it'll create a file, and you can use those settings again. You can also, and I'll show you how to do this as part of this installation, you can also take those setups or those settings for your setup and you can save it as an XML file, and then you can load that in. But in this case I'm going to start a brand new configuration, so I'll say new configuration and then we'll say next. Now, one of the key components of SAP Business One is what's called the System Landscape Directory, and this is the central repository for all of the information about your SAP Business One deployment. The SQL servers, the licensing server, the Business One integration server, the browser web configuration services, all of those different components. So the very first thing that the system is going to want to set up, it's going to want to set that up for you. Now you can either install it on this machine, or you could go ahead and install it on a different machine and connect to that remote system landscape directory. But we're just going to focus on the basics for now. We're going to install this locally, and then we'll say next. So then it's going to ask you, when you want to access the system landscape directory, what password do you want to use? Because it's going to create a user called B1 site user, and then it's going to use the password that you specify here. Now I'm a big believer in strong passwords, so I'm going to use a nice strong password with a combination of upper and lower case characters alphanumeric and non-alphanumeric characters as well, like exclamation marks, hashes, @ symbols, all of those kinds of things. So again, you make up your own password that makes sense for you, and then you just repeat that and it'll double check that to make sure it's all correct. So now it's going to ask you for the database server type, and it's going to try and detect that automatically, and it's detected that I'm running on SQL Server 2012, but you can see the installation will support 2014 as well. So then it's going to ask you for the server name. Now, I'm a big fan of using fully qualified domain names on all of your machines. Give you an example. My company is called SMB Solutions. My domain name is smbsolutions.com.au. So I set up all of my machines in my environment so that they have a fully qualified domain name. So this machine is called sbosql.smbsolutions.com.au. Now, if you are then setting up your system so that you can have access to it from the internet, this just makes the whole process a heck of a lot easier, and you'll see this more when we get into the components where we're installing the web browser interface for SAP Business One. All right. Now you've got a couple of choices here. You can create your own dedicated SQL user for doing your installation, or you can use your SA username and password. I'm just going to use the SA username and password. However, I don't normally recommend you do this in a production environment. In a production environment, you should always make sure that you set up a separate user, because when hackers or people trying to break into your system, they're going to start using the usernames like an admin or administrator or SA or whatever the case may be. So don't make it overly easy for them. And then I'm going to put in my SA password. Again, that's a nice strong password as well. And then you'll say next, and it's going to validate that password. Okay, and guess what? Richard made a mistake with his password. So again, I'm going to correct that, and that's better. All right. So now you're being presented with your list of choices. What are the components that you actually want to install on this machine? So by default, you have to install the repository. That's the SBO common database and a whole range of different bits and pieces. Okay, like the license server and the service manager, and you'll see some of these as we go through. But then it's going to give you the option, all right, do you want to create your demo databases? And I always like to make sure I've got a couple of demo databases on my SQL Server. So then I also want to make sure that I am installing my remote support platform. And if I'm going to use the Outlook integration, you will also want to install the Outlook integration server. And you can see when you choose each one of these over here, it will show you what exactly is going to be installed as part of this. So if I choose the Outlook integration server, that it installs the Microsoft Office templates that are required for the Outlook integration. All right, so I'm going to select all of those. Then again, as I said, as part of our repository, we've got our server tools that are being created here. Now, there's also some other components in SAP Business One, the DI server. I'm not going to explain what each one of these things are. That's something that you can find out by looking at some of the other videos. What I will say though is that you do want to take advantage of some of these tools, like the job service, like the workflow engine. So that's fundamentally what you need for the server components per se, apart from the integration services. Now then, you also want some of the add-ons that you're going to be using with your SAP Business One system. So you've now got a choice, because what this is going to do is actually going to take these add-ons, it's going to install them into the database so they can be installed on your workstations and terminal servers and so on and so forth. So you've got a choice whether or not you install the 32-bit versions or the 64-bit versions. Now, not every product comes with a 32-bit and a 64-bit version. Alright, so you just need to bear that in mind. For example, the Datev interface only comes with a 32-bit version. But again, my recommendation is wherever possible, use the 64-bit versions. Alright, so I'm just going to select those 64-bit versions, because that's what I want. And then I'm also going to go in here and I'm going to specify, well, what are the other components that I want on my server. Now, a lot of people kind of look at the server and say, well, you shouldn't really install client components on the server. I always like to do that because there's sometimes you want to do testing to see whether or not you've got issues that might be caused by connectivity between the clients and the server. So by installing some of these components on the server, and you can always go and remove them after you've done your testing, by installing these clients on the server, you'll be able to make sure that everything is running smoothly, at least from a server perspective, and then you can start debugging any connectivity issues. So we're going to load the DI API, the 64-bit version. We're going to load the 64-bit version of the SAP Business One client, and the SAP Business One client is the component that allows you to actually run SAP Business One, because as you'll know, SAP Business One is a client-server application. But there's also the browser access service, and the browser access service is what basically provides the interface between the SAP Business One client and server and generates the web-based user interface to use the browser-based client for SAP Business One. So we're going to configure that, we're going to install that. I'm not going to worry about installing the SDK or the solution package. Well, actually, why not? Let's just make sure we've gone through the whole process. So I'm going to include those. The solution packager, the SDK, we're going to install the data transfer workbench, and again, sometimes it can be helpful to put some of these things like the data transfer workbench on the server, because then anytime you're doing any data migrations, if you're doing it on the server, you just remove any of that latency, any of that those speed issues that may be related to trying to run some of these things on a client and having that client connecting to the server. Right, the SAP Business One Studio allows us to do our customizations. Alright, I'm going to install that because you're going to see what's going to happen if you don't have Visual Studio installed on the machine that you're installing this on, because that's going to be important. And then we've got our integration solution. So I'm going to install our integration solution components. So that's what we call B1I, the Business One Integration Platform, also known as the B1 or B1IF, the Business One Integration Framework, which is just basically the structure of how all of that works. Alright, so we've got that, and I think that's pretty much it. So then I'm going to say next. And now the installations are going to start. Now, some of these installations will be silent. You won't see anything happening. Some of the installation components will require you to answer questions as it's going through. So you do need to basically be there whilst you're doing this, although it is possible with some components to create an unattended installation script. Alright, but I'm the kind of person, I like to watch what's going on to see if everything's going as I expect it to. So I'm going to install the Australian demo database. So these are now that demo section that it was asking me for. And I'm going to install the US demo database. And then I'm going to say next. Now, this is really important. In these web-enabled days, you really want to be making sure that you're taking advantage of all of the best technology for the web. And you always want to make sure that whatever you do, you're doing it securely. So when you're accessing your system landscape directory, you want to secure it with HTTPS. Okay, so that's your encrypted hypertext transfer protocol. Now, in order for that to work effectively, you need to have a certificate. Now, SAP Business One installation will generate a self-signed certificate for you. Personally, I hate self-signed certificates. Remember I said I've got my own domain name, smbsolutions.com.au? So I always make sure for any domain I get a wildcard certificate. This will basically then give you a HTTPS certificate that you can use with any machine and any service that uses HTTPS or a certificate that exists on that domain. So for example, this machine is sbosql.smbsolutions.com.au. So my wildcard certificate will work with that machine. Later I'm going to show you how we set up our terminal server. So that terminal server might have a name like ts.smbsolutions.com.au. So I can use exactly the same wildcard certificate with that machine as well. So that's why I always use these wildcard certificates. Now, that wildcard certificate, depending on who you get it from, will usually come in a number of different formats. All right. Business One likes to have this in a PKC S12 format. Okay, don't worry about what that means, or if you do want to worry about what that means, go and look it up on Google. There's lots of great information that explains all of these different things, and I don't want to bog down on explaining some of those different components. But anyway, I'm going to specify that. Now, I found out a little thing here by the hard way. You've got to make sure that your certificate file is on the local machine that you are trying to do the installation from. If you try and refer to a certificate that's out on a network share or something like that, guess what? It'll never work. You're going to run into a never-ending stream of problems. The installation's going to appear to have gone south for the winter. All kinds of funky things would happen. So I discovered this basically through a process of trial and error. So that's why now I always locate this file somewhere on my local machine, and just for the sake of keeping things simple, I put it on the root directory of my C drive. Alright, so there it is. This is my SMB wildcard file. It's got a PFX extension, and it's secured with a password. And I think I just mistyped that as I put it into my keyboard, so let me retype that again, and then we'll say next, and that's done. So now system's going to ask you, alright, if people want to access the browser access service, okay, they want to access Business One in the web browser, it's saying what's the URL for the browser service. Now you'll see here that it's putting it on port 8100. You don't have to have it on that port. If you don't have any other services running on this machine that are using port 443, alright, you can go and you can remove that, okay, completely, or if you want to be on the safe side, you can say port 443. Now port 443 is the default HTTP port, okay? So this just means that it's going to make things a heck of a lot easier for people who are going to access this machine. So what does this mean? What I can do is, if I set it up like this, I can tell people out on the internet, you want to access my SAP Business One in the web browser, just go to https:/sbosql.smbsolutions.com.au/dispatcher, and it will work. Alright, no self-signed certificates, no need to install extra certificates, worry about certificate errors or anything like that. This is why I really, really recommend getting a wildcard certificate. Yes, it costs a few $100s, but it's well worth having. So anyway, same thing, I'm using my wildcard certificate, remember, so I can point to that same certificate store, because it's exactly the same certificate I can use for all of these different services. And you'll see when I do my HANA installation in another video, I can use the same certificate with HANA. Alright? Because these certificates, they're completely cross-platform and so on and so forth, as you're probably aware. Again, I'll put in my password. And that password is just so it can decrypt the certificate and install it in with the plumbing, let's use a technical term, with the plumbing of the web browser access service. Alright, so then I'll say next. And then it's asking me, hey, when the web browser access services, which version of the Business One client do you want to use? Now I've only installed the 64-bit in my options. So that's why it's only presenting me with the option for 64-bit. So, but that's the one that I want. So then I'll say next. And now it's asking me for a administrator password for the Business One Integration Framework, or B1IF. Alright, now I am going to, again, use my strong password, because again, remember, we love strong passwords. But just make sure you remember what the password was that you put in, okay? Otherwise you'll be running around, doing password resets and all kinds of other things like that, which are just mind-numbingly a waste of time. Alright, so now it's asking you, when the B1I system runs, it needs to connect to a database, and it needs to have its own database called B1IF. So I'm just going to tell it to access that same machine, okay, and it's on port 1433, which, as you know, is the standard SQL Server port. Alright, and then I'm going to put in my database user ID and my password. And then we'll say next. And now it's going to also ask me for a Business One user ID and password for DI calls, because I've installed the DI API. So again, a strong password for that. And again, I recommend, as you're going through, write down these passwords, alright, and then store them securely. So I've got that done, and now it gives me the option to say, where do I want to go? Well, I now want to go to my next step. We want to now specify which scenario packages we're going to bring in as part of our B1I system, our Business One integration solution. So I'm not going to activate payroll support because I'm not in Germany. I'm not in Mexico, so I don't need the electronic invoices. But I do want to activate support for the SAP customer checkout, and we'll explain what that is in another video a little later. So I'm going to say OK to that. And I'm not in Brazil, so I don't need Nota Fiscal Electronica support, all right, which is just a way that that documents have to be managed in Brazil. For those of you who don't live in Brazil, you're lucky, because they've got some very complex procedures that they have to go through, and that's what the Nota Fiscal is all about. For those of you who are watching this who are in Brazil, you're probably nodding your head going, yep, he's right, it's not simple. But anyway, I digress. Now, one of the new components that's available for SAP Business One is what's called SAP Anywhere. So in another video, I'm going to show you how SAP Anywhere works, and we're going to set up a configuration and all those kinds of things. But for now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to activate my support for SAP Anywhere. So simple, one tick, and it's going to create the package for SAP Anywhere. So I'll just activate that, and then I'll say next, and now it's giving me all of these details. Now, do you remember when we started this, it asked me, did I want to read my settings in from a file? Alright, this is the file that's been created. Okay, it's creating this file called config.xml, and what you can do is you can take that and you can store it somewhere else. You can then use it for making sure that next time you have to do installation, it's really quick. You don't have to remember any of these settings. Of course, assuming that everything is the same. Okay, but it's not a bad starting point. So then I'll say next. Now it's just saying, hey, the shared folder is not available, so the config.xml is going to be created in my current user profile folder, so that's fine. And then it's now basically saying we're ready to rock and roll. So now the boring stuff starts. This is where you basically sit back, relax, and enjoy the in-flight service. Those of you who were doing SAP Business One setups many years ago will know it wasn't always this easy. Alright, so the guys in the development team have done a great job of really making this a lot easier, particularly the B1I installation. But anyway, I'm editorializing again. So I'm going to hit the setup button, and away it goes. So what we're going to do is I'm only going to come back and explain things to you when there are additional questions that need to be answered, or when there's additional buttons that need to be clicked. But you can effectively, as I said, sit back, relax, enjoy the in-flight service, and then just wait for your installation to complete. So this is progressing nicely, but if you are a kind of person who worries a little bit if things are just sitting there and it doesn't look like something's happening, then there's a couple of things you can check. Alright, if you go into your SQL Server management console, you'll now see what's basically happened. Well, it started adding my databases. So here is my system landscape directory database. So you'll see there it is. The tables have been created, so you can expand those tables out. And you can see these are all the tables where all this information about your Business One implementation is going to be stored. So when you've created your B1I servers, if you go in here and you right click on that, and you say, you know, I want to select the top 1,000 rows. There's only going to be probably one or two in your average implementation. Here is the script that runs, and you'll see it's going to come back and it's going to give you the name of that server. Now, why is there nothing here? Because the installation hasn't gotten to that point yet. But after the B1I installation piece happens, you'll come back in here and you'll see all that information will be in here. Other things you can see, your common databases. The main repository for SAP Business One is the SBO Common. So when you go and you look at this and you go and you run that same query, what you'll see happen there, you'll basically see the common databases as they come through, and so on and so forth. Each of those different components, as you set them up, your remote server, your remote support platform servers, your mobile servers, your web browser gateway servers, they will all get populated into here. So if you're ever worried that nothing's happening, all right, just go in, take a look at your SQL Server, and you'll see those things are happening as well. All right, and you can see the system's progressed ahead and is still working. All right, so it's moved on to that next phase. Now, the other thing that can sometimes happen is occasionally the setup wizard will look like it's not responding, or it might even give you a message saying that it's not responding. Ignore it. Again, if you're worried and you think, well, is it really not responding? Is there really something happening? One of the things I like to do is just right click in here, okay, go and load up your task manager, okay, and this shows you everything that's going on in the background on the server, and you'll see it thinks that this component is not responding. Well, go here to performance, open up the resource monitor, all right, take a look at the disk activity, all right, and you'll see you've got your disk activity. So find your SAP Business One EXE, there it is, all right, and it's showing you exactly what's going on with this particular task. All right, so whoops, didn't want to click on there. Let's go back here. Let's make this a little bit bigger, and you'll see that the SAP Business One EXE is running a couple of threads. It's accessing two of the DLLs. It's reading data, so it's rattling away quite nicely. All right, you can also then go and start selecting other components in here. You want to see what's happening with your SQL Server. All right, is my SQL Server doing things? All right, now I always find disk activity is the best thing to look at. Whenever I get worried, I always just set up to access the disk activity. Now you'll see other things will start to pop in here as well, like your MSI exec. All right, and that's going to start showing you when you know, some of those other components of the system are being installed as well. So sometimes you have to be a little bit quick to be able to grab some of these. The other thing you can always do, of course, though, is you can sort these alphabetically, but some of these services, some of these components will start and then they'll stop, so they'll appear and disappear and appear and disappear. All right, so again, if you're worried something's not happening, go and take a look there, and you can see data that's being read and data that's being written. Okay, you can always filter this as well based on those column headers. All right, so I'm just going to drop that down the bottom, and I'm going to pop back here. You'll see it says it's not responding. Again, like I said, don't panic. It is working. The system is going through and it's doing all those steps in the background. Okay? And so you can now see that my SQL Server is now starting to create additional files. It's creating additional databases. There's my SBO Common is now being installed. So there's all kinds of goodness happening here. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable that things are progressing. And then of course you can see it's now moved on, and here in the setup wizard you'll see it's explaining to you what's happening as the system progresses, or as the installation progresses. And so now we've gotten to our first user interaction in this process, because the system's now ready to install the remote support platform. And the remote support platform, as you're probably aware, is a tool set that you, your partner, SAP can use to proactively maintain and monitor your SAP Business One deployment. So I'm just going to say next here, and it's going to then ask me, what do you want to install? So I'm going to install the agent service and the agent console. So I'm going to put both of these components on this machine. Now, you can put the agent console on a separate machine if you wanted to put it on a terminal server or whatever the case may be, but certainly for the first machine I always recommend that you do select the agent service and the agent console. So we'll say next, and then of course, because this is going to require some additional database tables to be set up, it's asking us for the information about our SQL Server. So again, remember, I'm using my fully qualified domain name and my database user ID, and then that's all I need to put in here. Now, if you've already got a license file and you've got that license file saved on your local machine, then you can specify the license file path, but it's probably not likely that you'll have a license file at this point in time, because you do have to run the server tools for the very first time to generate the machine key, to get SAP or your partner to generate your license file for you. But anyway, we'll go ahead and we'll say next. Oh, and by the way, if you're using a proxy server for your internet access, all right, that's what the system is asking you for here. So if you do have to have a proxy server for your internet access, this is where you put those details in. So I don't have a proxy server, so I'm just going to say next. And now it's going to ask me to create an RSP administrator account. So now, I'm a fairly unimaginative person, so I'm just going to create an account called admin. And the email address for this particular user, I'm just going to use one of my standard email addresses, which is info@smbsolutions.com.au. And then it's going to give you the option to start the RSP service using an administrator account. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to use a local service account, and I'll just say next. And then it's asking you, where do you want the RSP to be installed? Again, I select the default, but you can override that. You can put it in a different location if you want to. I'm going to create those shortcuts, and then we'll say next, and this process will continue. So now, while that's happening, you can actually see, if I go back here, you can scroll up and down here and you can see all those other components that have installed. So all of our add-ons have installed, our databases have installed, our Australian demo database, our US demo database, our Outlook integration server, and of course right now what's in progress is the remote support platform. This doesn't take long for this particular component to run, and of course it's showing you down here exactly what's happening. We've got 21 components to install, and so far we've successfully installed 12 of those. So if my mathematical genius serves me correctly, that means we've basically got 9 components left, 8 if we subtract the remote support platform. So we'll let the system keep working. And that's now finished, so it's going to ask us, do we want to launch the agent console? For now, I'm going to say no, I don't want to launch the agent console. I'm just going to focus on getting our installation done here. We'll come back and we'll look at things like the RSP. Plus, there's already videos that I've posted on my YouTube channel explaining how to use the remote support platform, but I'm in the process of redoing some of those as well. So now it's installing the DI API for me, and you'll see occasionally some of these components will pop up down the bottom. You'll just see the MSI exec as it loads up. That's part of the install shield wizard. As it loads up each one of these components, even though it's silent, it still does occasionally pop something into the taskbar down the bottom there. Now that that's finished, we're now on to the next stage, which is installing the SDK. So when you install the SDK, it's going to ask you just for a couple of questions. I'm going to put in my name and my company, and I'll say next. Then it's going to ask you for some options. Okay, do you want to do a typical installation or custom? Let's just take a look at the custom option. What it's going to ask you is do you want to install some of the samples and some of the tools? So you've got a couple of different options there. Again, not going to go into the details of what each one is, but for now I'm just going to install everything and I'll say next. It's going to validate that and the system will continue the installation. And so the SDK is now complete, so we'll say finish, and then it'll move on to the integration solution components, and we're almost there. We've got 17 of our 21 components successfully installed, no errors, no problems so far. Now the integration solution does install in a completely silent mode. Okay, so don't worry if you don't see anything happening, you don't see any extra icons popping up down the bottom here. And then our next step is the solution packager. Again, same scenario here. There's just a couple of these apps that do require you to put in this username and password. A little bit of a hangover from years ago, I guess. And we're going to install the company packager. Once again, if you're not sure, if you're sitting there thinking, what's the company packager and what does it do? Stay tuned for a video explaining that functionality. So that's our solution packager is done. Now the data transfer workbench. It's just going to ask you, where do you want to put this in your menu structure? So again, not too many questions that need to be answered with this one. We're almost done. And so that's now complete, and then it's on to the Business One Studio. Now what you're going to find here is we are going to get just a warning message here, because it's going to go and check to see whether or not I've got Visual Studio installed on this particular machine, and because I haven't, it's just going to let me know that the Visual Studio components won't be installed for that reason. So I can go in here and I could do a custom install, and I could tell it not to install the Visual Studio components, but for a lot of people they have a tendency just to do a standard install. So if you do a standard install, these will all be selected and you will get that message. So I just want you to be aware of that when you're doing the installation. Okay, so just a couple of other things whilst that's wrapping up. If you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, well what if I wanted to install some of these components one by one? So how do you do that? Well, actually the installation's now finished, so I'm just going to say next. And now it's just told us, hey, our installation's completed, and what we need to do is we need to bring in a valid Business One license file. Mind you, don't forget, if all you're doing is you're just doing this for demo purposes or you're just testing, then of course you can run the software for 30 days without putting in a license file, okay, with a limited number of users. So you've got your setup summary, your setup logs. You can open up the setup folder that's got all the log files in it, and you can review all of those log files at any particular point in time. Or of course you can just click on here and say finish, and we're now basically ready to go. So what I was saying before, if you go back in here and you look at the folder where you've got your installation files stored, you'll see you've got your packages. So these are all the 32-bit packages, and then you've got your 64-bit packages, and then you've got your prerequisites in here. Let's say for example you just wanted to install the B1 Studio. You've got the B1 Studio there. You can go in here, you can run your setup program again, and once again you can install the Visual Studio components. So that's it. That wraps up our server installation. The only thing that's left to do now is to do a reboot of the server. Now when you do a reboot, what that's going to do is that's going to allow all the services that are configured to run automatically at startup. It's going to allow them all to start, and then you can come in and you can start making sure that your system is correctly configured. And we're going to take a look at that in our next video.